Good evening, everyone. We are so delighted this evening for all of you here present in person on a chilly evening, and also for all those who are at home following on the live stream. We're very grateful to Kathy Skrupkis, who has led this outstanding program of Lenten presentations during this Lenten season 2025. That happens to be the Jubilee year 2025. This evening, the community is delighted to have with us Rabbi Victor Appell, who is right here serving the Reformed community at Temple Emmanuel on East Broad Street. All through the years with Victor and his dear colleagues, we have shared in so many events and activities together. As the Westfield Clergy Association, we have very strong bonds, and those bonds have moved into interfaith services, interfaith meetings, interfaith activities of all kinds. This evening, the community is indeed honored to have Victor share with us something that for us, as we come into the season of Holy Week and Easter, the more we know about the Passover, the richer the experience. Without any further ado, our brother, Rabbi Victor Appell.
Well, don't applaud. I haven't said anything yet. So thank you, Father Anthony. It is such a pleasure to be with all of you this evening. Can you hear me okay? Great. We love opportunities to learn from each other and to learn about our neighbors and our faith communities here. So it's a pleasure to have been invited to teach you a little bit about Passover, and the timing is, of course, not lost on us that Passover and Easter fall often around the same time. The difference in timing, it's not always, they don't always coincide. Sometimes they're a few weeks apart, which you may have noticed. And that is because Judaism follows a lunar calendar. The month is about 28 days long. And so what happens is the lunar calendar is different than what we call the Gregorian calendar. So you may notice that, for example, sometimes certain Jewish holidays come a little bit later or come a little bit earlier, at least according to my congregants. They're either late this year or early this year, and I always say, no, they're right on time. But that's because we follow a lunar calendar. But the lunar calendar has a built-in fix to it that the rabbis devised a long time ago so that the holidays don't wander aimlessly around the 12 months, which is what happens in the Muslim faith. Ramadan can sometimes be in the summer, Ramadan can be in the winter because they don't have that built-in fix. So the holidays do literally roam around the calendar. Ours just roam within about a month or so. I'm here to talk to you a little bit about Passover today, which is a big holiday for the Jewish community. So in the scheme of holidays, does anyone know what our holiest day of the year is? Oh, Yom Kippur. But its equal is actually Shabbat, which comes once a week. The Sabbath is considered the holiest day. It's right up there with Yom Kippur. And our other high holiday is Rosh Hashanah, which is the new year for Jewish people. And those come in the fall. After that, after those high holy days, some people pronounce it the high holidays, we have three festivals which occur throughout the year. One is Sukkot, which is the Feast of Booths, and this takes place in the autumn. And then we have Passover, and then after that we have Shavuot, which is the Feast of Weeks. You may know that as Pentecost in the church. And each of those are festivals. Specifically, they're pilgrimage festivals. So what did my ancestors, and maybe some of yours too, do during the pilgrimage festival? Where did they go? Jerusalem. And what did they do when they got there? They offered a sacrifice, exactly. So these three festivals were originally all harvest holidays. In the Bible, in the Hebrew Bible, these festivals all have an agricultural element to them, in addition to the religious element. So Sukkot, which takes place in the early fall, was the fall harvest, and the spring had two harvests. Passover is the early harvest, and Shavuot is the later harvest. So that's a little bit of a background as to where we are. So let's talk for a little bit about the origins of Passover, but first we need to have some vocabulary. So I want to make sure that, let's see if the clicker works. Oh, it does, it works. So these are some words that you may have heard, and there's some key words to helping you understand Passover. So Passover, that's English, obviously. In Hebrew, we call it Pesach. And so you may hear people refer to it as Pesach. Now, you may have any of you attended a Passover dinner at someone's home? Good for you. So if you have, you were invited to come over for the Seder, right? And the Seder is a Hebrew word which means order. So there is an order to the service, to the Passover service, right? Interestingly enough, the Seder has the same Hebrew root as the Hebrew word for prayer book, which is Siddur, meaning the order of the service, right? And by the way, if you have any questions, just feel free to stop me at any point. Because if you're like me, you'll have a question. If you don't ask it right away, you'll forget it. So Seder is the meal that we have, or the whole, and it's more than just a meal. If you've been to one, you know there's a lot going on before you finally get to eat. And the book that we use at the Seder, everyone gets a book, is called the Haggadah, which means the telling. It's the telling of the Passover story. And finally, matzah. You've all heard of matzah. I'm sure many of you have had. How many of you have had matzah? What do you think of it? You love it. We hate it. You love it. I don't. We always say if there's leftover matzah, our non-Jewish friends and neighbors will be glad to take it off of our hands. And you're also the only ones that want to eat it all year round. So that is the unleavened bread. Does anyone know the story of the unleavened bread? Yeah.
During enslavement in Egypt, was the king attempting at the Egyptians into Hebrew, and this was when they had to leave.
Right, they had to leave very quickly, right? Moses basically said, come on, Pharaoh has finally agreed to let us go, and Pharaoh is notorious for changing his mind, right? So we've got to go really fast. Right, so it did not have time to rise, and hence matzah, and that's one of the things that we eat at Passover. In fact, for many Jews during the entire week of Passover, and it's a week-long holiday, we don't eat any leaven. So that means no bread, no pasta, and anything has to be made from matzah meal. Like cake is made from matzah meal. And you eat a lot of matzah, and after a few days, it usually wreaks havoc on your digestive system. So you have to pace yourself. All right, so it works perfectly. So why do we celebrate Passover, and what are the biblical origins of it? So this is a passage from the book of Exodus, chapter 12, verse 17. Do I have a volunteer to read it for us? Yes.
You shall observe
Right, thank you. So there we have it. The holiday Passover is also known as the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And of course, the unleavened bread is the matzah, right? Sort of the hallmark of what our ancestors had to eat. And that is the only food from Passover that's actually mentioned in the Bible, right, is the matzah. And it says, we are going to do this because we were brought out of the land of Egypt. And we're going to observe this throughout the ages as an institution for all time. So this holiday is not going anywhere, right? We're always going to observe this holiday. And the point of the holiday is that it is directly connected to Egypt, right? And our experience as being enslaved in Egypt, right? So this is a story of redemption, right? We are redeemed by a hand mightier than our own, right? God takes us out of Egypt, right? And from this, even though I don't have the verses here, we learn that we are always supposed to remember the experience of slavery. Right? We are never to forget what it is like to be an enslaved people. And because of that, we're always supposed to offer extra care to the widow, the orphan, and the stranger, right? And so these become hallmarks of how Jews kind of live their lives and our commitment to social action and social justice. All of this emanates from our experience as being enslaved. And this is a kind of a cornerstone of Jewish belief and Jewish practice today. Part of most of anyone who is an actively engaged Jewish person at some point is involved in what we call tikkun olam, which is the Hebrew phrase for repairing the earth or repairing the world. Viewing the world as being broken, and it's our job to work in partnership with God to repair the world. And all of this comes directly from our experience as being a people who were enslaved. And because of that, we are commanded never to forget what it is like to be an enslaved person. Here we go. And one of the cornerstones, one of the reasons for the whole Seder goes back to the Bible, right? The Seder, are any of you educators? Okay. So you as an educator, the Seder is, in my mind, the ultimate lesson plan. It is a great way to teach children about a very kind of complicated concept. And we'll get to that. So here it says, and when your children ask you, what do you mean by this rite? You shall say, it is the Passover sacrifice to God who passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt when smiting the Egyptians, but saved our houses. And that's from Exodus, and it goes on a chapter later, and you shall explain to your child on that day, it is because of what God did for me when I was free, when I went free from Egypt. So built into the whole idea of Passover is this idea of it being a holiday where we pass on the tradition to our children by teaching them about Passover, right? This is a very important part of it, and it's why we have the Seder, right? And in fact, Passover happens to be, among Jewish people, the most widely observed holiday. Now, you might think it would be Yom Kippur, our holiest day, right? But interestingly enough, it's Passover, and one of the reasons is because Passover is a home-based holiday. We'll have a service on the first day of Passover and on the last day of Passover, and we'll get some people, maybe around this size, but I've got over 3,000 people in my congregation, right? They'll all show up, or at least most of them will show up for Yom Kippur, right? But on Passover, they're not going to show up at temple, but they're all having seders at their homes, or they're going to a seder at the home of a friend or a relative. And even lots of families who go on vacation will find a seder somewhere. One year I had the pleasure of being the rabbi at the San Juan Hilton, leading a Seder for a bunch of families, many I'm sure from New Jersey, who were down in San Juan on spring break, but still wanted to go to a Seder. So families, no matter where they go, will find a way to observe this holiday, even if they're far from home. There are many Orthodox families there are hotels that just become kosher for Passover, are taken over by Orthodox families who go there so they don't have to do any of the preparations at home. Because there's a lot of cooking and cleaning involved in Passover. So that's a little bit about the biblical origins of the holiday for us and why it is so important and why we are expected to make this a holiday where we really instruct our children, to teach our children, to pass this on. There's no other holiday in the Bible that mentions our responsibility of teaching about it to our children, because it is such an important holiday, and this becomes a cornerstone, like I said, of Jewish practice. So, I'm sorry, that is a little hard to read, but that is a Seder plate. Now, for those of you who've been to a Seder, or if you've learned a little bit about the Seder, you might know that is the centerpiece of the table, right? And there are all of these symbols on the Seder plate that are designed to be representative, and they are teaching tools, right? Again, like I said, this is a great lesson plan designed really for children. So on the Seder plate, we have a number of items. Yeah, if you want to give that out, that'd be lovely. You might be able to see it. Right. So, but if you want to open it up, you'll see a slightly larger photograph of that Seder plate. I'll wait till a few more of you get copies of it. You may have to share. The origin of the ceremony. Okay, so that's really interesting. So the Seder so we have the idea in the Bible from Exodus that we're supposed to do this, right? And we're told that every year on this day, we're going to observe the Feast of Unleavened Bread, right? And the one thing that we get is that there's going to be a Passover sacrifice, right? The Paschal Lamb. You've got it right up over there, right? And so that's really the only instruction that we get from the Bible, is that. And the Paschal Lamb goes back to the idea that every family was told the first time as they're leaving Egypt, the Israelites had to sacrifice an animal, and they would take some of its blood, and they would put the blood on their doorpost, right? Anyone know why they did that? Yeah. Right, the angel of death that was going to smite all of the firstborn of Egypt, the firstborn sons, that was the final plague, the 10th plague, would bypass the Jewish homes. Right, so that's the only thing that we know that we're supposed to do. We're supposed to sacrifice this animal, and we're supposed to eat unleavened bread for an entire week. That's the only thing that we get. The Seder, as we know it, started to develop only after the destruction of the Second Temple, which happens in the year 70 CE. We refer to it as the Common Era. So only after 70 do we start to see the development of the Passover, the Seder, the way we know it today. The destruction of the Second Temple in the year 70 gave birth to what we called Rabbinic Judaism. That's when the Jews of Israel went into exile. Babylonia became the seat of Jewish governance and power and learning. And rabbis started to interpret the Torah and basically gave us the Judaism that we have today. So this started to be developed during that time. And then over the years, it developed kind of continually, and also developed differently in different places. So the Seder that we have today is often the Seder that was developed probably in Europe among what we call Ashkenazic Jews. Those are European Jews. And we have certain customs and certain foods. There's the other side of Judaism, which are called Sephardic Jews. Those are Jews from Portugal, Spain, Northern Africa, and the rest of the Middle East, including Israel, and they have different foods and different customs. So, for example, I'm Ashkenazi, which is my family comes originally from Europe. A staple of Passover are potatoes, right? Because what were my ancestors? Potato farmers, for all I know, right? So they ate potatoes. So if you took away bread and you also took away potatoes, they'd be starving for the week. So they have potatoes. Now, if you go to Northern Africa or many parts of the Middle East, they don't have potatoes. They have rice. But as an Ashkenazic Jew, they view rice as something you're forbidden to eat on Passover. But Sephardic Jews have rice, because if they didn't have rice and they didn't have bread, they'd starve for the week, right? So a lot of foods that are forbidden to one group are allowed to another group, depending on where they're from, which was driven by the fact that what they had on hand to eat, right? So those customs developed over the years and regionally, right? And they're continuing to change today. Back in the 1970s, the feminist movement gave rise to what we call the feminist Seder, which is all about the role of women in Judaism and looking at the whole experience of enslavement from a feminist perspective. So a very different way of looking at it, right? So there's lots of ways, and there's lots of different, there are many different Haggadot. There's not just one Haggadah. Haggadot's plural, and that's the book that we use. And some are very traditional, and some are very modern, and very have a very different take on the story. But this is the Seder plate, and you'll see up at the top is the shank bone, which represents the lamb, the Paschal lamb, right? And then we're going to have other signs of things that are related to the Passover story or to the time of year. So after that, we have the bitter herbs, which are maror, and that's horseradish. And if you've ever had the horseradish root itself, that's also medicinal. It will clear your sinuses. It's better than Flonase. So the bitter herbs, or the horseradish, is a reminder of the bitterness of slavery, right? And then going around, then we have something called charoset, which is, in this case, made with apples, nuts, spices, and wine, right? And it's sort of like a paste. And you can put it on a cracker, you can put it on a piece of matzah. It's very sweet. Kids love it. It's very delicious. And that is the representative of the mortar that the Israelite slaves used to build the pyramids. Now, the interesting thing about charoset, just like some of the foods that are common to some areas versus other areas, at some point Jews have lived just about everywhere, and so there are no end to the number of charoset recipes. So that's a very traditional Eastern European recipe, but I have had charoset with pineapple and charoset with coconut, because those, if you live in Hawaii, that's what's available, and that's what you're going to put in your charoset. So charoset recipes, there are dozens and dozens of them, maybe hundreds, and they're representative of the cultures and the foods that were common to wherever Jews happen to be living. After charoset, then we have lettuce, and that is a symbol of, it's green, so it's a symbol of spring. It's a springtime holiday, and so we have that symbol. And then we have we'll have parsley. Again, that's another symbol of spring and rebirth. And finally, we have an egg, which is another symbol of rebirth and spring. Now, if you're a vegetarian, you may not have a shank bone on your Seder plate. Anyone know what you might use if you're a vegetarian? You might have a roasted beet in place of that. Right, right. So those are the symbols. And during the course of the Seder, in the Haggadah, in the book that we use, there's an explanation of each of these. There's a point where we sort of rhetorically ask, and what's the purpose of this? And what's the purpose of this? And what's the purpose of this? So that we explain it as we go through the Seder. Any questions so far?
So
Yeah.
everyone has a plate with those items?
No, there's usually just one in the center. Some people do actually miniature versions of them at each place setting. That's a lot of work. But most people have one in the center of the table. Now, many people, depending on their Seder, it's not unusual for people to have 20, 30, 40 people, or as many people as they can wedge into their homes on Passover. And in those cases, obviously, you've got different tables set up. I don't know anyone who has a table for 40. So you might have Seder plates scattered around so that everyone is not too far away from one of them.
So it's for display or discussion.
Right.
As opposed to, this is what I mean.
Right. Because all of those things that are on there, on the table, there will be little bowls of horseradish, there'll be little bowls of haroset, there'll be parsley around the table. So, the things that would get eaten are actually distributed around the table. So they can be eaten from the Seder plate, but they don't need to be eaten from the Seder plate. Now, so one of the, again, this is, thinking of this as a lesson plan, we have some questions that we want to answer. And these are known as Manish Tana Halayla Hazeh, the 4 questions. And this becomes the task of the youngest person at the Seder, to ask these 4 questions. And there's a melody that a child will sing them to. And for a young child of, maybe 7, 8, 9, 10, this is both terrifying and an opportunity to shine simultaneously, right? Because they're going to do it in Hebrew, and they're going to show off their Hebrew reading skills, and they're going to want to impress everyone, but I can assure you they are very, very nervous. Now, so it's always, like I said, it falls to the youngest person. Before any children were born in my family, my poor sister-in-law in her late 20s had to recite the 4 questions. Finally, we all had children, so she was relieved of that task, for which she was very grateful. So we ask these questions to sort of help us understand why we are doing some of the things that we do on Passover. So the first question, on all other nights we eat chametz, which is the Hebrew word for leavened foods like bread or pasta, right? And matzah. We can eat matzah any time of the year, right? Why on this night only matzah, right? So this is the question that we're supposed to answer throughout the course of the Seder. That by the end of the Seder, you understand that this is, on the Passover holiday, we only eat matzah, we don't eat any leavened bread. And then the next question is, on all other nights, we eat all types of vegetables. Why on this night, maror, or the bitter herbs, right? We can eat other vegetables too, but why specifically on this night do we eat bitter herbs? And again, that's a reminder of the bitterness of slavery. And then we have, on all other nights, we don't dip even once. Why on this night do we dip twice? So what's the dipping about, right? So, on a Seder table, you're going to have little bowls of salt water. And you're going to take some of that parsley, not necessarily the parsley that was on the Seder plate, but a piece of parsley, and you're going to dip it into the salty water, and you're going to eat it. Anybody know what that might remind us of? The tears of the slaves, right? So this is definitely going to, this is a very experiential way of learning, right? We're going to consume the mortar, we're going to taste the tears, and then finally, on all of the nights, we eat either sitting upright or reclining. Why on this night do we all recline? So, there's a custom, not everyone follows it, there's a custom that at the Seder you should sit on a nice cushion. There are times that you should be able to lean over to one side. And why would someone, what is that? Anyone know what that's representative of? An ancient banquet. Because if you were a free person, let's say in Rome or Greece, right? And you were at a banquet, you'd be on a bunch of cushions, right? And you'd be leaning over, supporting yourself with your non-dominant hand, and feeding yourself with your dominant hand, right? Or better yet, someone would be feeding you, right? And there's the idea that on any night one could sit upright or one could recline, but on Passover one is going to recline, right? So we have these 4 questions that kind of frame some of the Seder for us. And like I said, it's kind of designed as a child's question. Any questions? Yeah.
So here's the question.
Okay.
Who answers the questions?
Who answers the question? So then we go to the 4 sons or the 4 children. And because we're gender inclusive now, it's no longer the 4 sons, it's the 4 children, right? And this has been totally rewritten. I've given you the very traditional way, but I'll give you the way that it's sort of been reinterpreted. And there's a typo. It says, what does the wild child say? It's the wise child, not the wild child. So this is the wise child asks details about the specific meaning of the laws of Passover observances. What are the testimonies, the statutes, the laws, which Adonai our God has commanded you, to which we respond with one of the very specific laws of the Passover Seder. So this is sort of an opportunity to talk about some of the specific laws of Passover. Why we do some of the things we do, what we do, when we do them, how we do them, right? So this is the wise child. And then we're going to go to the wicked child. Right? And that's a term that we no longer use at Seders. Usually, we don't call that the wicked child anymore. And then this child asks, whatever does this mean to you? Right? The authors admonish this child as one who is not concerned about the laws personally, but only for others. So this is the child that has removed themselves from the group. Right? What does this mean to you? Not what does it mean to me? This exchange reminds us of the importance of not separating ourselves from our community or from traditions that might seem uncomfortable or foreign to us, but rather to engage with them in ways that enable us to connect with our community. So this question is all about, or this child is the child, so each of these is a sort of a learning, an opportunity for more learning. So with the wise child, this is our opportunity to engage in a more high-level conversation, right? To use it as an opportunity for the child who shows an interest in this, or not just a child, anyone sitting at our Seder table, or you, for example, who wanted to learn about this. So you're all the wise children. Congratulations. So that's an opportunity to sort of explain things, right? Now, the wicked child in this case is a child that feels disconnected or removed. Who why do I have to go to church on Sunday? I'm sure none of you have heard that from your children. And just for the record, my children have never said that to me either. So this is kind of, the point of this question is really not to view this child as wicked. And like I said, if you look at a modern Haggadah, they wouldn't say the wicked child anymore. They would say the child who feels distant or removed, or who doesn't see the meaning in this, right? So this is the opportunity to draw someone in with our answer. Kind of give them an answer that helps them understand that this is an ancient tradition that still speaks to us today, that bears tremendous meaning. And even if they don't see the relevance in some of the rituals, to understand that this is a holiday that is both formational and foundational for the Jewish experience today. And then we're going to go on to the simple child, right? So this child asks, what does this mean? right? To which a straightforward summary of the story is given directly from the Torah. It was with a mighty hand that God brought us out from Egypt, the house of bondage, right? So this is the child or the individual that really comes to this Seder with very little background, with very little knowledge. And what this question sort of teaches us is that we have to meet people where they are, right? We can't assume that people are going to come with a lot of knowledge or even a lot of interest or a lot of passion or a lot of belief. So we have to meet someone at the place where they are, and that is the way we're going to draw them in, right? We're not going to assume anything about them, but we're going to find out. We're going to be inquisitive and find out where they are and why they're there, and that's how we're going to bring them in. And then we have one more child. And this is in response to the child who does not even know how to ask. We are instructed to open it up and explain it. It's because of what God did for me when I went free from Egypt. So this is the person who doesn't even know where to begin, right? They don't even know why they're at the Seder. It's because they accepted an invitation. It's because their parents told them they had to come. But again, this is a way of thinking about how do we welcome people into our communities, and not assuming anything, right, about people when they walk into our sacred spaces, right? So we often look at these 4 questions, or these 4 children, and think not only about those sitting around our Seder table, but those who are in our community, right? And how do we reach out to all of those people? How do we welcome them in to our communities, especially our communities of faith, right? So it serves not only as a teaching device for the Seder, but we often like to think it serves as, in a larger sense, as a way of instructing us on how to be as welcoming as we can to everyone who enters into our sacred communities. Now, we seem to love the number 4, right? So we have 4 questions, 4 children, and 4 cups of wine. Like I said, it's a very well-designed lesson plan, right? We're going to keep using the same number. There could have been 3 cups, but now we're going to have 4 cups, right? We're going to do 4, 4, 4. So it's very easy to remember. So now we have 4 cups of wine, which is great. Now, not everyone drinks an entire cup, unless you're my mother-in-law. So during the service, there are 4 cups of wine. Now, the tradition is you don't pour your own wine. Someone pours it for you. Why? We're celebrating our freedom. And as free people, someone else is going to pour the wine for us. But we, in turn, are going to do it for someone else. So no one is free and no one is enslaved. We're all going to do this for each other. So during the course of the Seder, and if you're at my Seder, it goes on for a while. So Seders can last hours, depending on who's leading it. And there's a lot of opportunities to sing songs in the middle or throughout. Throughout the Seder are 4 cups of wine. Like I said, you can drink as much or as little of that cup as you like, or you can have grape juice instead. And it's very common for people at Passover to serve these very sweet kosher wines. I don't know if any of you have ever had Manischewitz. That's a very Concord. It's a very sweet, syrupy wine. It's certainly not something you can drink an entire glass of. But each of these 4 cups represents something from Exodus. They correspond to these promises that God made to the Israelites. I will bring you out. I will deliver you. I will redeem you. I will take you. So these are the 4 promises that God makes to the Israelites, and each of those promises is interpreted as a cup of wine. Any questions? And then, one of the favorite parts of the service is that toward the end of the service, we send the youngest children to the door. And they have to open the door, right? And who are they looking for? Elijah the prophet. Why are they looking for Elijah? What? I'm sorry? Okay, so right. So there's two things, right? There is a cup on the table for Elijah, right? It's just a cup full of wine on the table, no place setting, but just on there. And but obviously Elijah's not there. So one of the tricks that we do is when you send the children out to the door to go look for Elijah, we pour some of the wine out, and the kids are like, "Where'd the wine go?" Must have been Elijah. I don't know. I didn't drink it. Right? So they're looking for Elijah because Elijah is the prophet who is going to announce the coming of the Messiah. Right? And so we want to know if the Messiah is going to come in this next year. Right? Because actually, Passover is one of the Jewish New Years. Right? So while Rosh Hashanah in the fall is the start of the calendar year, Passover is another way that we mark a new year. The date doesn't change, the year doesn't change, but liturgically, it starts the year in a way. So we want to see if Elijah is going to be there, right? And now on many tables, to be a little bit more inclusive, there might also be a cup of Miriam, right? That's a new invention, the cup of Miriam. Now, does anyone know, who knows their Hebrew Bible very well? Does anybody know what Miriam is associated with? Right. She sings the song, "Who was like you, Almighty God, who freed us," right? From the book of Exodus, as the Israelites crossed the sea. And that's a good idea of what she's related to, because Miriam is always related to water, right? And it starts way before that. It starts when Moses is a baby, and he's in the water, and she puts him in that basket, right? So she has a long connection with water. And now, what happens when Miriam dies? The wells dry up. There's no water, right? So Miriam is always associated with water. In fact, Miriam means bitter waters. That's what her name means in Hebrew. And so what we do with the Miriam's cup is it's an empty cup. And the cup gets passed around from each person, one person to the next, and we each take a little water from our water glass and pour it into Miriam's cup. Now, this is a very modern ritual. Maybe it's, 40 years, 50 years old. It probably goes back to the 1970s or 80s. But this has caught on, and many, many seders will have Miriam's cup. And it is sort of a way that we express that we all create community together, that we all contribute to our communities. So the children are going to go see if Elijah is there, and he is yet to show up at my door. And then we're going to say, we end the Seder with this wish of next year in Jerusalem. That next year may we all be redeemed, that within the next year may the Messiah come, and may we all be in Jerusalem in the coming year. So that is a fast tour of the Seder and why we observe it. So, any questions?
Wait, let me give you the microphone because we're live streaming. Did you have a question?
Why are there 2 nights of?
Why are there 2 nights? Because everybody cooks too much food and there's a lot of leftovers. So you got to do it all again the next night. Seriously, however, the reason why we do it on 2 nights is because back a long time ago, before there were calendars, right? We mark time by the new month or the new moon, right? And what would happen is that if someone lived in a town where there was an elevated place like Jerusalem, someone would see the new moon. They would call from a mountaintop to the next mountaintop and tell people that it was the new moon. And they, in turn, would do that over and over and over again to the various communities. Now, there was always a concern that someone might miss the call, and so they would observe the holiday twice. So if you didn't get it right on the first day, you'd get it right on the second day, right? We do that with some of our other holidays as well. So that's why we do this. Right? but it's a chance, to go to someone else's house after you've had everyone to your house. One night, you go to someone else's house, and the next night, let them clean up all those pots of crumbs.
Is it true that they only do it one night in Israel?
Yes, very good point. Right. So in Israel, they only do it one night because they're in Israel. So they're not worried that, a community in 2,000 miles away won't get the right date. So in Israel, they actually do it only one night. And so great. And now at one time, Reformed Jews, liberal Jews, which is part of what our synagogue is part of, only did one night too, but now we do 2 nights. So, yeah, great question.
I wonder if I could ask about the slaughter of the lambs.
Mm-hmm.
I know that in New Testament times it was at the temple, but when it returned to the home setting, is the slaughter have any more sacrificial dimension? Are the Kohanim involved at all, or is it only the butcher who slaughters? And at what time of day? I know the evening twilight was interpreted back then as noon onward. Is that still true, or is it more limited?
Well, so the first thing is that with the destruction of the Second Temple in the year 70, the sacrificial system came to an end, right? The rabbis decided that once the temple in Israel was destroyed, which is where all of the sacrifices were made, that no more sacrifices would be made. And so with that came an end to sacrificing the lamb, right? So ultimately what that became was just the shank bone from the butcher. Right? And that animal can be sacrificed. That animal can be slaughtered at any time.
Thank you.
Someone else?
I might be loud enough, but okay. Oh, yes.
Oh,
Well, first of all, I'd like to say I think it's so beautiful, the traditions. I grew up Irish Catholic, and the tradition was more children are meant to be seen, not heard. So I think it's so beautiful how children are honored and incorporated into the holidays, and in many other ways as well. And it was wonderful to hear the story of the escape from slavery, the escape from Egypt. I'm wondering if there's a big struggle now for people in your congregation here in Westfield with what's going on in Gaza and how the people there are in many ways enslaved and subjugated and now being massacred. I guess it's a difficult to yes, I guess sit and celebrate your own rescue or escape from slavery and then watch others in your name.
Right. Great question, very timely. So first of all, I will say that I think one of the reasons why Passover is so widely observed is because there is such a tremendous focus on children. And there are many things. So if you go to someone's house for Passover and they have children, you will see little plastic frogs spread around the table because that's one of the plagues, right? And you will see there's something called plagues in a bag. And so there's something, so everyone gets a bag, and there's some representative of every plague in the bag. And every time we mention the plague, we have to find in the bag the little, sometimes it's a mask, of whatever the plague is. And they're done in comical ways. And so it's very, very, very kid-friendly. As far as, one of the things that many people do at their seders is try to incorporate what's happening in the world around them. Because in many ways, the story of Passover is an eternal story of different people's struggle for liberation and freedom. And it is never lost on us that while we may be celebrating our freedom, there are other people who are not enjoying their freedom. So for many, many years, one of the main focal points of seders was the subjugation of Jews in Russia when they were not allowed to leave and they were considered second-class citizens. They couldn't get jobs, they couldn't get housing, they couldn't practice their religion. Most of the Jews who wanted to leave Russia have since left, and so over the years we focused on different things. We've often focused on the struggle of immigrants, wherever they might be, or if there are people that are suffering this year. So I have no doubt that at many Seders this year, there will be talk about the suffering of the people of Gaza, and a hope that their suffering will come to an end, and that at some point they will be able to live in freedom and in dignity.
There's a bunch of smart people, and they think
I
they don't want to ask the questions. Oh, good.
Okay. Is it truly an 8-day or 7 or 8-day feast festival, but only the first 2 are the party days?
So what
How
we
do they
have,
wrap
so
it up?
right, so in the Bible it says we're supposed to observe Passover for 7 days, right? So again, it goes back to that tricky calendar, right? So what many outside of Israel, many people decided that, oh no, we need to make sure that we observe Passover for 8 days. So in case we started on the wrong day, we won't end on the wrong day. We'll make sure we add an extra day and cover it completely. So we reduce the risk of observing it for less than the entire amount. So they bear on the side of caution. So our synagogue, Temple Emmanuel, we observe Passover for 7 days, but there are a lot of our members that come from more traditional backgrounds, and they'll observe it for an extra day. And basically what that means is they are stuck with matzah for one more day.
So when you say observe Passover, is that just only eat matzah and unleavened bread, or?
So what that means is according to the Torah, the first day and the last day are sacred days of assembly. So those become days for us when, if you're, depending on your level of observance, you would consider that a day like a Sabbath. So you wouldn't do any work. And if you're very religious, you wouldn't travel, you wouldn't engage in commerce, you wouldn't do any form of work, right? And so for Orthodox Jews, that first day of Passover and the last day, but again, they want to make sure. So they do 2 days at the beginning and 2 days at the end. In my congregation, we do 1 day at the beginning and 1 day at the end. We're not so worried about the calendar because now we know when Passover falls, we know when the new moon begins. And even though Orthodox Jews know that too, they have calendars and they look at them. But for some Jews, for Orthodox Jews, they tend to rely on tradition, and once something is enshrined, they are very hesitant to make changes to it. In Reform Judaism, which is our denomination, we're much more open to making changes, especially as we try to accommodate the reality of our lives.
Okay, a very simple question, I guess. This nice lady over there, Lucille, gave me a box of matzah.
Okay.
And I've been eating the box of matzah. And I'm looking at it saying, why is it always square? Okay, because I could buy different kinds of bread or crackers or anything else. But this matzah always seems to be the same size.
Yes, they're a little
Yeah,
square.
square.
Right. So that is basically a function of production,
Okay.
right? So there's no waste. Because there are other matzahs that you can buy that are round,
Okay.
right? But think about, if you've got a long roll of, if you're rolling out flour or you're rolling out pasta, if you're making little rectangles, you're going to have a lot less waste than if you're making circles, right? So it's a matter of production.
Okay.
And the interesting thing about matzah is that it has to be made from start to finish within 18 minutes. So it doesn't rise. It's made 18 minutes.
All right. Any other cooking questions, food, anything like that?
And there are different grades of matzah. So what you buy in the store in the box is one type of matzah. There's another matzah that is called shmura matzah, and those are round, and they don't usually come in a box. And you have to go to a very, very, very Orthodox bakery to buy those. And why? And they're more expensive. They taste even worse than what's in the box. But yet you pay more because you're guaranteed there's absolutely no chance of leaven. And so what many Jewish people do is they go through their entire house to clean it so that there's no leaven, no flour. And in fact, what many Jews do, is common among Orthodox Jews and many conservative Jews, is they have separate sets of dishes and cookware just for the week of Passover. It sits boxed up somewhere in the garage or the basement or the attic for 51 weeks of the year. And then for that 1 week, they have all these dishes and utensils and cookware, everything they need just for Passover. And they will get rid of all of the food in their house or move it away. And they will buy everything that is just, they will check very carefully to make sure that everything they buy says kosher for Passover. So that there's absolutely no leaven. It's sort of, it's taking the holiday to a very extreme level. But for a lot of people, that's sort of the joy of the holiday.
I guess we have no more questions, but thank you so much.
You're welcome.
You know, now we can really clap. So a lot of the way I've planned some lectures during Lent is, what do I want to learn? You know, Joe came up, Joe was one of our presenters, and he came up with this idea. I said, that's great, I want to know this, but this is what I wanted to know. So, but if you have ideas, you know, circulate them back to me, and we can plan more. It doesn't just have to be during Lent. You know, we can. I'm sure we can find somebody to be as smart and as witty and as clever and as entertaining and information.
I try.
Yeah. So, but thank you so much, and thank you all for being here. All right, be well.
And you're all always welcome to join us at Temple Emmanuel. We're just down the road on the other side of on Broad Street. And if you'd ever like to learn anything about Judaism, please just be in touch. Happy to come back. Happy to welcome you into Temple Emmanuel. So thank you all.
He's got something to show you for show and tell.
Oh, okay.
Show and tell.
I love it. Oh my gosh. Wow. Wow. So, wow. I have...
My story is, I'm Jewish.